Well, it's really great to be back. I haven't been here since before COVID, 4 years ago now. I spent most of this time in my house. This is my first boots on ground in all this time. I'm usually on Zoom. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Mr. Carson. And I wanted to say I've been very pleased because just this week I discovered that this year, at least that's what Google says, because sometimes you don't know what year you're reading, but the Ayurvedic Medicine College in India opened courses in medical astrology, and 1,000 people registered.
Wow.
1,000 students registered. So to begin with, what is astrology and what is medical astrology? And they're different. So medical astrology is the use of any cosmic alignments or the sun or the moon for medical purposes. So probably all indigenous people around the world have some medical astrology, as did the ancient era in Mesopotamia, Babylon, Egypt, but they did not use astrological. Astrological medicine is the name for the actual system of medicine used throughout the Renaissance by most physicians. They had to be licensed in their astrological abilities until 1666 to practice medicine. There were chairs in Paris, Oxford, Padua, Florence, Bologna, that people would study this. It was a triune system of medicine called Astrological Physic in England. Astrologo Physic means astrological medicine. That's what I call my school, the academy, or medicine. And so it's the most wonderful craft, and it is every bit as complex and nuanced as is Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine. It was deliberately attacked and besmirched and snapped out, but it never died. And we'll be going into some of its uses, applications, and history. And so to start with, there are 6 genres within astrology. We have first the natal pattern, and that's where you look at the natal chart to get the whole template of the see from the auspices about the astral world. So we have, different kinds of bodies, different layers. But you see this template, and I found the most wonderful quote by Dr. William Davidson. Now, Dr. William Davidson was writing 1859, and he was a real doctor, and he gave a significant, amazing set of lectures, I think 5 or 10 of them. And he always told people, do not record, do not take notes. But of course, they secretly recorded him. And somebody transcribed them. And now we have the most wonderful Davidson's lectures. And he's just full of the most amazing quotes. So in looking at the natal pattern, this is one of my favorites. He says, an expert looking at a photograph record can tell you a great deal by means of the microscope about the hills and grooves and ridges. The expert astrologer looking at a horoscope can tell what kind of music or disharmony those forces will bring about into the body. So the first thing we must remember is that behind chemistry is force. You can tell in the twinkling of an eye, if you use astrology, to the doctor who's great insight. The quickness, the speed of it is unbelievable. It's like reading a piece of music. After all, that's what a horoscope is. It's a music of the soul projected into. Oh, wow. So this is your natal. Now we always start. Then we have.
Excuse me, the audio is really bad. We can hardly make it up.
It's in and out.
Yeah, it keeps cutting and fading. The audio has a problem.
Oh, now they cut us off.
This is Ron again. I'll interrupt just for a real quick second to tell you that this will be recorded today And we'll
Yeah.
put it onto our website. You'll be able to get it right off the piece of equipment that we've got right here. You'll have the best audio that way. You may suffer a little here. Just watch
Okay.
her. She's very animated. She's given a lot away that you're not seeing in your ears.
Have we
Okay.
Have we cut their meat? You know, is that the problem? Is not.
No.
Why do I need a microphone?
No, thank you. Go ahead now, please. I'm
So it's
sorry for the interruption.
It's okay. I just do want them to hear. So, thank you, whoever got this one. So we have name. And then we have transit, which includes what we call progressions. Transit is what's happening right now. And right now, you can, the transits are a whole nother study, and they're used to determine a good time for surgery, a good time for hospital release, best times to harvest herbs, best times to administer herbs. They're used for fertility. They're used for everything. And I like to give some stories here because it keep you awake. So I'll give you two surgical stories and a fertility story. These are real and from my practice. And these things happen all the time. So I got this one case, 66-year-old woman, grossly obese, needed a knee surgery. So she goes to an all knee surgery clinic, and I pick her the exact day and the exact time. I also was able to pick her surgeon a little bit, and she was able to get that date. And she never told anybody what she did. And both the doctors said they had never in the history of the clinic seen anybody recover so quickly and so pain-free. And she was off her meds in 4 weeks. And so then, now this story is a little sad. A friend of mine wanted me to look at the date that his mother's knee surgery was planned. And it was an in-office knee surgery. And it was the worst possible date she could have picked. But the husband was setting off her. And every single planet was in a bad aspect to her natal pattern. So I told him, I said, tell your father that's absolutely bad. So he tells the father, and the father not only ignored it, but never told the mother anything. So she was in influence. And she had the surgery. They gave her the wrong medicine, and she died. Now, so then another case, fertility astrology is its own branch. We teach this too. And I always say I'm now the proud father of many. Because I've helped so many women get pregnant who never could. And my most striking example, it was when this woman, she was in her 30s, and it was when the computer addictions were very new. And people were getting addicted to computers, and now this is normal. So the person who isn't addicted is weird. So she came in and she says, well, I'm a computer wife. My husband sits all day on the computer, and I really want to have a baby. And we've been trying for 7 years. I said, well, I looked at her chart, and I was like, oh my goodness. And she wanted a girl. Said, tonight at 7 o'clock. You're at super high fertility, and it's for female babies. So I don't know what she did. She must have dragged him off the computer, but she got pregnant. Bing, and it was a beautiful baby girl. And this is just some of the many uses of transit astrology. Now, natal astrology, you look into, you can see the natural weaknesses in the body. It helps a lot with diagnosis. You use these two for diagnosis. What is the natural weakness? And what's happening.
And you could see strengths too.
Yes, you can see strengths. You can see if a person, temperament was so important in ancient times. Is a person too cold, too hot, too moist, too stringent? Watermelon is real different than a sparrow. And yet they're made out of the same stuff. So, some people are sparrows, some people are watermelons. And you get a very different temperament individual just born. Then you have genetic influences. You can see so much. So then you have the mental branches, mental health. So this I consider a separate branch. And unfortunately, this branch sort of took over astrology after the 1910 without reference to medical astrology and all that had been known before. And what had happened was in around 1910, Alan Leo was the astrologer, and he's a wonderful writer who's one of the last great, astrologers who wrote with this real spiritual gravitas, just in a looking at character development. It's very, very nice. I love his work. And he was very famous. And at that time, Jung and Freud, their seminal works were coming out at the same time. And at the same time, astrologers were getting arrested, and Alan Leo gets arrested under the Vagrancy Act. And he gets arrested twice and put in jail. And astrology was illegal in California until 1988 or 89. And I practiced as a criminal. I was a criminal for years, and people were being taken to jail. It was very slow to get legalized throughout the United States. There's such ignorance. Say questions. And so the Alan Leo instructed all of the astrologers to start giving psychological type consultations so they would not get arrested. And it turned, and people could start now becoming astropsychologists and not go through school and make all this money and stuff. So anyway, it became a very popular use of astrology, and only now is medical astrology and the practical uses that we've always done come into a field. And but mental health astrology is very important, and I have a whole course on this. You can, and there's a lot still being discovered. What in the chart shows multiple personality disorder? Is the person having mania because it's physical, or is it supernatural? These old etiologies are still used in our field. And let's see. Then we have, somehow my mind went blank. We have remedials. Oh no, we have horary and electional. These are related. Now, horary, these come from the most ancient times. They were used in by first century Greeks, even possibly earlier, and very, very well developed during the medieval period in the Arab kingdoms, and then became the standard use in England when natal charts became illegal. And the horary chart, for medical purposes, is called the decumbature, and it means decumbo, or to lie down. So you do a chart when the person gets sick, and that tells you a great deal. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't tell you as much as a natal chart with transits. I know this because I've done both. But it's what they had to use, especially when almost none of the poor people knew their birth times. You could not get a really very accurate chart. And so, it's a very nice, so this was medical horary. And electional is sort of horary in reverse. It's where you, like what I did with the surgery dates, when you deliberately choose a good time to start a treatment, or to have surgery, or to get pregnant, or any other needs you might, like should I let that person out of the hospital? I'll give you another example of this. I had a client, and she had a world-class asthma attack. So she went to the hospital, and he gave her a little inhaler, and everything seemed fine, no more problems. And I looked at her chart. I called her up. I said, you have a day about 3 days from now, I think, or a week from now, where you're likely to, you could have another world-class attack. Do not let that inhaler out of your hand. So, of course, the spouse went and hid the inhaler. What? Yeah. So, but she remembered when I told her, and she went and found it. And that day had such a world-class asthma attack that she tells me that this information saved her life. She said, if I had not that inhaler in my hand, she's about 70, she said, I would have died. And that's, that's that's more the transit, but, it's connected. Now, in ancient Greece, they called these all katarchy, meaning inceptional astrology. And katarchy, Karta, it means inceptional. And so these two are very related. And then we have remedials. Now, this is very important. And in other words, what do you do? What kind of remedies would cure you individually or are good for? Because in those days, they didn't think so much in terms of diseases. They thought like homeopaths. This person has a set of symptoms. And they also have their own individual temperament. And then they have their horoscope that's telling us this is more or less severe. That's another thing, more or less severe. So there's several kinds of remedials they used. And in Astrological, which was a triune medical system, the main thing was herbs. So you had patient examination, herbs, and also you had foods, and you had talismans and amulets and gems. And you also had, so they didn't have a concept of nutrition, but they did have foods. And so, and you also had patient examination. Patient examination, astrology, and remedials. This is the triune system known as Astrological medicine or astrological physics. And when we get to the history of this all, you'll see how it all works together. So, we have the chart. We have transits. Transits are what's happening right now. And then we have patient examination, and they had tongue and pulse. And then we have your remedials, which was, herbs, stones, and all kinds of ways those were used. So, so we have, quite an amazing, system. Now, the use of herbs goes way back. We're going to be getting into some history pretty soon. But I wanted to I made a little list in my book for medical practitioners of, this is all the things that either medical astrology or astrological medicine would apply for. Defining the type, amount, and strength of a patient's innate vital force. It's from the natal chart. We're all born with a certain amount of chi or prana, and we also get rid of it faster. And some people learn, some theosophists know, you can pull more into you. You can be born with very little, but you can learn to bring your tank back up. And all the little weak Pisces out there are actually really good at doing this. So the weakest sign is the most porous and can pull the more energy in and actually do very well if it learns to do that. Selecting safe surgery dates. Find the seat of chronic disease. Every chart has a seat of chronic disease. Identifying the seat of inflammation. Every chart, there's an odd sound, I hope it's okay. There's a seat of inflammation.
What's the difference?
The seat of chronic disease, actually, I'm going to get off on a whole different tangent by that question. Can I read my list?
Yeah.
So, diagnosing the cause of mysterious symptoms. This is the most wonderful use of astrology. I work with doctors when I have time, and doctors that want me to help them, and they'll give me a case. And I get a case through a patient, but I'm very careful. I always have them sign waivers and work through them. But you'll find out things that the doctors can't see instantly. So I'm not practicing right now. I'm way too busy running the academy. I did have a lot of experience with this. I had one lady, and she had a chart. She was really suffering. Nobody could figure out what was wrong. two interesting cases. And she was actually dying slowly. And I looked at the chart, and she was a health practitioner. And said, poisoning through the air. And she says she thought I was a nutcase and she left. Well, 2 months later, she calls me and she says, you were right. And 5 doctors couldn't figure this out. I said, what? She says, some workmen came in and found out that I had a carbon monoxide leak, and I'm only alive because I sleep with my window cracked. And I had another case. This was fairly recently, and a woman was really suffering, and she said, nobody can figure out what's. In 1 second, remember Twinkling of the Eye, Dr. Davidson? I saw an inflamed spinal cord and something wrong with the pituitary. So she gets back to me. She says, well, you cracked the case. I went back to the doctor. I have an inflamed spinal cord and I have empty sella syndrome, which is where the Turca sella, I think Turkey, it's a funny name. It's a little cavity that holds your pituitary gland, was empty. And so it's too much room or something around the pituitary and it causes various problems. And so this is how medical astrology is so useful. You can also comprehend adjunct causes contributed to a disease process, assist with fertility and conception, selecting dates for cesarean sections. I've done that for people. Knowing when to release a patient from the hospital. Invaluable. Identifying length of illness and mortal potential. Now, the English medical astrologers were very keen on this. They would take a case if it looked like the person was going to die. So that was one of their main reasons for doing the decumature, because then that would ruin their career. So this was written up in a biography of William Lilly. Selecting appropriate herbs for treatment. Identifying the patient's innate weaknesses and strengths. Assessing etiological category. Is the disease physical or psychological or supernatural? And yes, they had all 3 that you would determine from the natal chart and the transits of the decumature. Now, until about 1700, astrologers and doctors had a much wider palette of etiology, causation. We've thrown most of these out. So they believed in elves and fairies, ghosts, various kinds of entities, and entities that try to get into you or possess you or influence you. They believed in of God, which is karma. Mm-hmm. The Jyotish, or astrologers of India, believe in karma. They believe in genetic influences, they would say, of parents, plus all your normal, bad air, bad food. And they also were really keen on constipation being a major cause of health problems. And this was probably because if you look at the diets in Shakespeare's England, they were really bread, meat, cheese, bread, meat, a little bit of cabbage, bread, meat. And when you got to the city, it was worse, which is where they were. So they have diaries that describe those. Being alert to individual patient idiosyncrasy and reaction. Some people much more sensitive to medicines. Being prepared for collective health trends. Very important. We see these all the time. Selecting the right surgeon. I've done a lot of that. Lawyers, real estate agents too. Determining the onset of menopause, big life changes. Very easy. Also alert you. This is so important. I saved a few when I did this one. Alert you to when a problem is far more dangerous than you would otherwise. And we'll go into that. Also, providing best times for herbal planting, harvest, decoction, and administering. Understanding your patients. Now, as far as alerting you to a problem that is far more serious than otherwise, I had one case, and people have heard me talk, have heard me tell some of these cases before, but I had one case of an astrologer, and she came and she said, I want to take a trip to Bahamas or something. I've been planning it all this time, and the doctor feels I need an exploratory surgery. Now, can you look and see whether I should take it before or cancel my trip or just go to the trip? Come back and do it. Doctor didn't seem there was any rush, left it up to her. Her chart showed she would be dead in 3 days. And I didn't know how to tell her this, but I said, you know, I think you ought to do this. And calls me back a few weeks later. She says, I went in, and she was the vice president of the Portland Astrological organization, but not very. And she called me a few days. She says, you know, they opened me up and they found that my bowel had just perforated and I would have been dead in 24 hours. And she almost died anyway, but she made it through and lived probably another 20 years. And this is I've done a few things like this. It's any good medical astrologer can do this who's trained. Now, why they don't have this in these astrology departments in medical clinics, I do know. Well, I do know, and that's we're going to get into some history. So, horrible sound. Well, there's several. Are you all interested in history?
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't know if I should do all this. I don't know if it would bore you. Okay, so let's use a different color. We have different eras. The ancient era, the Hellenistic era. We have the Sassanid Persians.
What's a Sassanid?
It was an empire.
Okay.
Then we're going to have the medieval. And then we're going to have the Renaissance. And the Golden Age was right here in England, curiously. And we'll say why. And then we have the modern and postmodern, where we are now. It's hard to write like this. Modern. And then in here, I had to name this one, the Great Abandonment. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm just a lay historian, and I've had to put on my thinking cap and sift through a lot of material over the years to produce this timeline for you. And many things will probably be left out. But when I was doing this, I made some real discoveries. The reason I made the discoveries is most people who are putting together histories of astrology are not considering medical astrology as a separate topic. Or those putting together the history of medicine are not including medical astrology enough. And in fact, if you go up to Google, it will lie to you about many things, especially astrological things. It doesn't like astrology. Somebody who's behind what they say on Google when asked astrological questions is very, very anti-astrology and will lie. Like if you put in, was medical astrology legal? It will say, astrology was never legal. All astrology was banned by the church. Well, that's not true. In 1552 or 3 at the Tridentine Council, astrology was divided into 2 halves, natural and judicial. Natural astrology is legal and was expected to be used by every single physician and was used by most of the physicians and taught by popes and studied by popes, and it's medical astrology. Medical and agricultural uses of astrology are legal. And of course, that's if you're concerned about this, anti-astrology then. They never were part of that. So that's one of the lies. And the other lie that Google will give you.
What about judicial astrology?
Judicial astrology was the use of astrology for making personal predictions for people or describing character, natal reading. So natal charts became illegal to use. You could be, so poor John Dee was put in the Tower of London in 1555 for reading the charts of little Queen Elizabeth and her sister. She became a great champion of astrology later. She once even escaped on her horse. You know, she was a great horsewoman. She escaped her handlers and rode by herself 30 miles out to Mortlake to knock on John Dee's door. And he came out all flustered and had his servants clean up the house while he entertained her with his newest devices outside. But she protected him during his life and the other astrologers of the realm, just as much as King Henry's wrote a charter protecting all the herbalists of the realm, because they were also under attack during his period. So, but we have these different eras. Now, the ancient period would be before Hippocrates, so before maybe 300 or 400 BCE. This is Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Persia, Babylon. Now, from what I can tell, they did not practice astrological medicine at all. There's very, very little known. What they did do, they practiced some medical astrology, and there's almost nothing known about it. We know that they use what are called decans in the sky. 30, you divide every zodiac sign into 3 parts, decans. And these were used, if one found one little tract that these were used medically in some way, and they're not even clear how, in prognosis. And so, however, the development of astrology has many rivulets coming from here. As we get into the Hellenistic period, which is about 300 something BC through about 33 CE, that's considered Hellenistic. That's where astrological medicine really took form, as did horoscopic astrology. Now, horoscopic astrology is the astrology that uses a horoscope, which means houses, ascendant sign, midheaven, planets and houses, aspects with signs. There is no horoscopic astrology in the Vedas. People think there is because they call it Vedic astrology now. This is an American new habit. It's called Jyotish, the science of light. That's what it means, science of light. What the Rig Veda has, you notice in your little timeline, the Rig Veda, and I've been all through the Vedas. I took them home, and this is all I could find. But there's like one reference to the moon ruling consumption, one reference to the sun ruling the eyes, I believe, and one reference to Mars being hot, and then one reference to somewhere else in the Vedas to a 12-spoke wheel. That's it. No horoscopes. But they obviously knew something about temperature and planets. We know that this is concealing a lot. But the astrological medicine that we know today did not come up through India. They kind of have their own branch, and we have to talk about one thing today. So we'll stay on the Western route, which is where the system that I'm teaching comes from. So then in Hellenistic times, as we get around, it was all put together in parts. The planets having temperatures, the planets being assigned to various metals, which now can be proven. There's actually proof of this. You can watch it, photographs. I'll have to talk about that. But planets being assigned to herbs, elements being assigned to the zodiac signs, and the house system. It's all sort of together within 100 years on either side of the birth of Christ. So 0 point. 100 years on either side. Everything is coming together. Even Thessalus of Tralles' work on the virtue of herbs, where he assigns herbs to signs. So everything is pretty much together by that period, and it holds through the Roman period. So the Romans used the Hellenistic system, and they were really heavy on nativities. They were mostly using natal charts, almost exclusively, but we know that they did use the decumbatures, and they used Katarki, conceptual astrology. They were getting into, the use of timing and this, but they were really heavy on nativities, natal astrology. And they have many collections of their little natal charts, which is fascinating. there are many important writers during this period that came up. Ptolemy, 140 AD, wrote the book, the Tetrabiblios, the 4 books. There's a wonderful, amazingly detailed section on mental health and astrology. And on, there's other writers too that are, then we have the Sassanid Persians. They come along and they start doing translations of the Greek works into Pahlavi. And so they're a conduit that brings it into this era. So they're copying out all these Hellenistic books by Dorotheus and Rhetorus and Vidius Valens and all these people, and they're in Ptolemy, and they're putting them into Pahlavi and probably a little bit into Persian. And they're doing this, they start this up in about 200, to maybe 500 or 600 CE. These are these early first wave of translations. Okay. And now there's one problem here, is I think there's a man named Avicenna. This is a little discovery I made. So the Persians, from this route, they developed Unani Tib, their own Persian medicine, their own system of Persian medicine. They use the 4 elements. Now, 4 elements are not astrological. Astrology uses the 4 elements, just like Ayurveda uses, it's similar in Chinese, they have their elements. But the Sassanid Persians were very crazy about the work of one writer, Avicenna. They call him Ibn Sina. So their term is Ibn Sina. And so I've been reading books on I think it's an S, on Persian medicine, and I can't find any medical astrology in there. I can't find any astrological medicine in there. And I'm going, why? They have all this Greek medicine in it, and some things from India, some things from the Arabs, but where's astrological medicine? And they keep talking about they're all getting everything from Avicenna's canon. Well, Avicenna didn't like astrology. He thought it was a subordinate science into theoretical. He didn't think it didn't work, but those were his complaints. So he didn't include it much in his canon. So that's why Unani Tib, this is my discovery, Unani Tib just doesn't have it, because they basically, that's their god, is Avicenna. But that didn't happen with the medieval era. So the medieval era, I made some real discoveries too. This is our era that starts really about with the founding of Baghdad. It's all about 760 CE. But in 70, let's get a really important period. So in 777, Jacob ben Turk, a Jew, founded a school of astrology in Baghdad. And this begins also people, we have scientists and people being brought into the Arabic Empire. And you have many, many people translating now the Pahlavi Persian period works that were the conduit for all the Greek writers, Ptolemy, Dorotheus, Rhetorus, Valens, and Manilius, into many others, into Arabic. And most of them had to have Arabic names. So you have in this early, you have first wave translations, and some of them are writing their own conflationary books. And probably our most important, Saul Ibn Bishr and Masha Allah. Now, also two Jewish translators and scholars, and I believe they may have been physicians. I have to look them up. They're all born, these are in the 800s. So these, Saul ben Isher made a huge conflation of the work of this one's hard for me, Al-Andar Ghazar, who I believe was almost contemporaneous with him, but I believe, I still researched him. I believe he was from the Persian Sassanid period, or he was one of them, but he's a little later. He's closer to them. And so he had a wonderful book called On Nativities. It was this huge book. And so practically the whole thing gets copied into Saul Ben Isher, and he puts all these other, and he got his work from the Greek writers, Dorotheus and Rhetorus. So they all start, so Saul Ben Isher writes this huge compilation of all these previous authors, and Masha Allah starts doing similar things. And there also was another Jewish writer named, his last name was Israeli, and they're all doing this. And then we get to the like 900s and 1000s, and you have finally an Arab writer, Haley Benrada.
And ask a quick landlord question.
Could you hold them till the end of the program, please? Please mute.
So I'm just giving you the names important, and my history has a lot of detail on each one. So you start getting a second wave of later translations. Now the fun part is all of these translations start making it over to.
Hey, Cam, can I call and
Salerno. So what my big discovery was, everybody thinks that all the writers in medical astrology are Arabic, whereas the dominant translators and writers are Persian and Jewish. And you do get Constantine the African, who's a Christian monk, and he was busy. They all come later, though, most of them. And you do get Haley, and you do get a few, but it's dominated by Jewish and Persian writers and translators who were brought into the Arabic Empire, were working with Arabic names and translating to Arabic. It's a fascinating discovery, which I'm bringing out. Now, that may have not been the case for medicine. There's huge rosters of Arab doctors, and the Arabs were very responsible for an enormous amount of pharmacology at this time, and some of the first herbals, really fine crafted herbals, and a lot of Persians were too. But the Jewish writers were particularly interested in medicine. Now, there's a reason for this, and that medicine is a traditional craft of Jewish men and Jewish women. All through the medieval and Renaissance times, only Jewish women were found licensed for medicine and practicing medicine. One even was able to serve men. Many were ophthalmologists. We find them in Turkey, Libya, Germany, France. And I've listed some of them. I tried to make the timeline a little bit unusual. Some things you're not going to find elsewhere. So Jewish women were part of this, though they were a little hidden. And Salerno is opened in 850 CE in southern Italy, the University of Medicine, with programs in medical astrology. And they taught women too. They're right in the medieval period. So we're already into Europe. And then in the 1200s, Montpellier, I think it's 1220, it's in the timeline. Montpellier in France set up a second university, also teaching astrological medicine. Now, how did all this get into Europe, Northern Europe, to bring on the big golden age? Well, there's several routes. People always cite the Crusades. Well, yes, the Crusades came down to Alexandria. This was all going on too in the library there, where Ptolemy studied and made his Tetrabiblios in 140 AD of the astrology known at that time. And so, the Crusades got down there and they ravaged everything, and they brought home a lot of books. Yes, but we have, what's the date of the what happened here in Constantinople? 1492. Yes, the 1453, the fall of Constantine, sent Greek physicians and Jewish physicians, all with this knowledge, scrambling all over the place. And then 1492. Now, this is a time when, remember, Jews were serving often the assigned doctors to the sultans and the kings. And some Arabs were, some Persians were, but it was a particular specialty of Jewish people. And so the expulsion of the Jews in 1492 sent Jews from Spain, even into the Baltics. People have found this out, the Latvia, Lithuania, sent them up into France and England and Holland. They tended to go north at that time, also to America. But a group fled off to India, and they are now called the Paradisi. And bringing this craft with them, obviously. But there's another fascinating history of it. The Beaton family. Anybody heard of the Beaton family? Anybody heard of the McQueen, the name McQueen? Well, the Scots of the period from 1300 to 17 had a inherited medical kindred called the Beatons. And they were the doctors. And they were really quite remarkable because at an early period, a lot of them had gone down and studied in Montpellier Europe. There's also an amazing book called When Scotland Was Jewish. Apparently, some of the Jews fled the highlands of Scotland as well from the expulsion and probably the fall of Constantinople, which is both of those huge events happened at the same time. So we had, way up in the highlands of Scotland and in Ireland, we had some very significant libraries with this work there. And I got 2 books on the Beaton family. So this laid the groundwork for Edinburgh. Is that how you pronounce it?
Edinburgh.
Edinburgh. For Edinburgh to become the main medical center of Europe for quite a while there, and a lot of medical discoveries. So we had the Beatons. And so we had several wonderful ways this happened. And this brings us to my favorite era, the one I know most about. So again, you're hearing this all from a lay historian with a really good memory. I have it kind of pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle in my head. And we're going to talk about what life was like under Queen Elizabeth. Call this the Elizabethan period, which was the golden age of medical astrology. Now, when I wrote the introduction to Culpeper's, what's the name of that long book? He wrote an astrology book. Oh dear, I can't remember right now.
The Doomsday Book?
No, the judgment of astrological judgment of the diseases of the sick from the decumature. That's the name of Culpeper.
Wow.
So I was thrilled to write the recent introduction to a new edition of this amazing classic book recently, and I had a lot of fun. And when I called it the Golden Age, they did not like that because they thought, well, how can you call it the Golden Age? It all comes from other places. Well, no, it was the Golden Age. Why? Because they had printing presses. They not only had printing presses, it was the birth of the Enlightenment. So they wanted to imitate what was going on with the new sciences, and you started to have significant medical astrology chart collections and diaries with notes. You have Saunders and Ashmole, Foreman. I think Foreman had thousands of charts, even detailed his own sexual exploits. He did everything. He's got a chart on. And then you've got, you should read this. And then you've got, you had libraries in giant, vast collections. Then you had the medical diaries. Now, Joseph Blograve is my favorite. If you want to read the life of a doctor of that period, Joseph Blograve. And they're all born at the same time. Oh, the other reason this became the Golden Age is Queen Elizabeth was protecting for a while. But we had several geniuses born all in the environs of London with the printing presses, with the diaries, with the new ephemeruses. They're putting out all kinds of things. And so our geniuses are, well, there's many of them, but have you heard of Nicholas Culpeper?
Yes.
Well, Nicholas Culpeper was very amazing. People don't know this. Now, this period probably goes from 1550 to 1666. Now in 1666, astrology was suddenly thrown out of all the universities, and a sudden interrogating besmirchment campaign began against astrology in great earnest. And the last great diary was written about 1680, I think. And then it had to go underground. The great abandonment began. Just abandoned. It was hidden. Had to be. So they're imitating the scientists. They're trying to discover things, to test things. They're developing the methods. They formed the London Society of Astrologers in London, which met at various pubs. And you have so Culpeper was very important. We'll go into him because of his 3-point work. You have William Lilly, who predicted the fire of London. He was an astrologo physician. People never hear this. He would go into the streets of London and treat people and give them herbs, look at their decumbratures. He has a giant tome called Christian Astrology, which with a lavish fawning to the king in front of it. And because they had to. And he's got a beautiful section on reading medical reports. So you have Simon Foreman, you have Ashmole, you have William Lilly, all on the heels of John Dee. You never hear that John Dee was an astrologo physician, do you? You hear he was a magician, or he was a mathematician. He was such a good astrologo physician. He was given, he was like, what is it? The head of, he was somehow in charge of the physicians of Prague. And it turns out he was an herbalist. He did take clients. I've had to go to enormous lengths to discover this. It's in almost no bios of his that he was involved in medicine. And I mean, it's ridiculous how much this gets hidden. But anyway, so we have these they were all forming libraries. Now, John Dee was in Queen Elizabeth's era, and he was a very old man when these others were being born. But so all these geniuses were born within one lifetime and a half in London. And John Dee began the library, the London Library, the biggest library in Europe at that time. The Queen gave them the fee. So people were coming to this library. So the other astrologers, a generation later, are making their huge libraries. There's a few really good libraries being collected, all kinds of religions. But of course, they're very interested in astrology. That is, the astrologers were doctors. So now, why was Culpeper so important? Just as period is ending and there's a hue and cry because astrology comes under attack. The earth, it was found the earth was not the center of the universe. Galenic medicine was in tatters. They found that, the liver was not making the blood, that they were learning about the human vascular system. They found out that Galen had some things wrong. So therefore, let's throw the baby out with the bath. We have some things wrong. Astrology must be wrong. But what was also fueling this were politicians and the Royal College of Physicians, who were extracting high prices, sauntering around the kingdom on horseback with ermine, speaking Latin. They did not like the astrologo physicians who were using local herbs, treating the poor people, low prices, and they were very threatened by this. And they were also trying to shut women. In the 1400s, they petitioned Parliament 1492 to ban all women physicians. And so they're doing the same thing they've always done. Anyway, so the astrologers became under attack by the Royal College of Physicians who were also using astrology, no doubt, and the politicians. Why did the politicians want to get rid of them? William Lilly's partly at fault. Some of the astrologers were lampooning the politicians in their very, very popular almanacs. So astrological almanacs were now all over London because of the printing presses and monthly. They were like our newspapers. And they would print little ditties, you'd have those little ditties they would sing in the pubs. And that would be lampooning various politicians. They would be making predictions the politicians did not appreciate. And so they fell afoul of a lot of the politicians. I believe that William Lilly and maybe Culpeper too, I always sometimes mix these two people up, were put on trial a few times, and they tried to get them. So there was a huge desire by the then there were what Saunders always called astrology's ever-present carping critics. So the carping critics were always there railing against astrology. And then you had the church. The church was always uneasy with anything that stepped on the will of God. So it was okay with medical astrology, but not natal. But they join in the fray. And astrology is pushed down so greatly that we're still recovering. I mean, look what goes on Google. Oh, what is astrology? A pseudoscience. Absolutely no proof of any proof. I've been involved in multiple research projects that prove astrology works. How can they keep saying this? We probably have 20 good projects that show proof of cosmobiological influences since the 1960s, and Google is still saying there is no proof. There is a law that was in California which you could not be represented on the media if you're an astrologer without being made to look foolish or silly. So I learned that right away. And I remember turning on the TV once in Portland, and there's a person standing with a microphone, the reporter, in front of a giant palmistry sign, and it says, Madame Zolar, and it says the astrologers are having their financial conference downtown here today, and it has nothing to do with Madame Zolar. And these financial astrologers are very sophisticated people. They're stock traders. They know this works. And if anybody's a good astrologer, it's them. So, you have this. I once went into I wanted to see how astrology was shown in the vocational library for it. And I went down, we had two huge books, vocational guides, before everything was always glued to a computer. And I look up astrologer, and both of them it's put under entertainer.
Mm-hmm.
Entertainer. And that's a real astrologer's farthest thing from an entertainer. So this is still going on rampant, and the ignorance is rampant, which is why I like to give these talks every now and then. I'm preaching to the saved here, but but if you don't, if the people who are set against it, they just can't believe it works, and there's nothing you can do. But anyway, so yeah, I always find I have a very good approach when somebody tells me they start getting a little argumentative. I'll say, have you studied the subject? And this always stumps them because they usually haven't. And I'll say, I'm very kind. I'll say, well, we'll study the subject enough to do some natal charts, and then get back to me. We'll have a discussion and see if you still don't believe. If you still don't believe, I will totally respect your opinion. Learned enough to talk about it. But just not believe in it. Well, you have to know what you aren't believing, right? So, and I'm completely respectful of skeptics. I'm very skeptical. I spent 10 years in the statistical research of astrology. I proved it worked to my satisfaction. And I use it all the time. So, but that doesn't mean someone else has the same. So I'm always respectful of a skeptic who does their work. It's good to be skeptical.
The article on astrology in Wikipedia
Yeah.
listed 2 studies, both proving that astrology did not work.
Yeah, they have they're doing this on purpose. I don't know why, but anything you ask them will get what this lady has said. You'll get this very odd.
I just looked it up, and it's called, many consider it a pseudoscience. They had to make a bigger word for it.
Yeah, and they don't even know about a lot of the research. They haven't done their research at all. They're just parroting what they're told to say. Somebody's behind that is telling them to always make astrology look bad. And they never even know what astrology is. I mean, I find most people do not know it, and what a venerable ancient art this is. But anyway, so what happens here? So just as they're getting, there's still some more eras to talk about. Am I going over time?
You're fine.
Keep going.
Okay.
I mean, please.
Okay, we got a little more. So we'll wrap it up. But so right as we're going downhill, Culpeper gets busy, and in 3 years, he's obviously trying to save the science. Writes 3 books: Culpeper's Herbs, The Astrological Judgment of Diseases of the Sick, and another book related to herbs too. But it's basically the system of astrological physics written in 3 books. Now, Culpeper's Herbal has become our longest read book in the English language and our most read book in the English language, apparently, maybe until Harry Potter. And this is what I was always told. And so that's, Culpeper's book. At the same time, Blaugrave is writing his book, his diary, which details the entire system. And Saunders wrote his book detailing the entire system that they had in those days. They did not have enough natal because they weren't allowed to use it. But I did find a few natal charts stuck into it. It was called. Anyway, so so they're trying to save the science with these books, and most people don't even know Culpeper was an astrologer. Great repute. Now, so what happens now? So now we have the Great Abandonment. We have and it really didn't hit till about 1700. So about 1700 to 1900, or maybe 1880s, till Alan Lear comes along. We just have this gulf. There's almost no new writings. People don't see, they're not supposed to. Astrology isn't very big. It's not so popular. It's underground. But people are practicing it secretly. Some of it ends up in this American South, American folk medicine. There's a wonderful book by someone I know, Phyllis Light. She's lives up in the hills there in Kentucky or something. Wrote a book on Southern folk medicine in the United States. They maintain some knowledge of the 4 elements, some moon knowledge for planting, and some of the old black farmers use it too. And but little dribs and drabs. It didn't really make it across the pond. But there's George Washington. He's an astrologer. He's casting charts. He's diaries of them every single day. He's a sophisticated astrologer. He's casting electionals for the founding of the cornerstone buildings of Washington, D.C. There's a book on this. These are all astrologically carefully timed. Anyway, so what happens is there's a slow comeback, and we enter the modern period. And but I was going to say, Blaugrave's diary, he's using astrological physics and some of their magical methods of the Renaissance. And he's curing epilepsy. And he gives very detailed accounts of how they do it, and it never came back. They're curing diseases we cannot cure now. And there's diseases we cure now, they cannot cure. But they had a whole different approach to things like epilepsy, and they believed in supernatural causes. And Blaugrave gives a wonderful way to tell if something is supernatural or not. Now, the wonderful thing about medical astrologers is they had all these etiologies, but the chart would tell you which one, as well as some tests. And they're also, of the etiologies, Paracelsus, who was also very important, he was itemizing his etiologies, and he had one called Ens Astral. Ens Astral. And Ens Astral meant astrological causation. Now, if you are astute and you study this, you can even feel when it changes signs. You can feel it. And you can feel when Mars changes signs. And you can feel, like your friend always gets the bad knee every time the moon's in Capricorn. Or your other friends who drinks is always getting a bad indigestion every time the moon goes through Virgo because it stimulates the liver. And it's just like clockwork. You get sensitive. I can feel the tiniest astral changes. I can guess them. It's amazing. But I was sort of born now. But Ens Astral, astrological causation, major etiology. But now, what happened now? We are in the modern period. Modern. So now we really take off. We have now what has never happened in ancient times. We have Cornell's Encyclopedia of medical astrology. I've got some of Cornell's quotes in here. He was like two different kinds of doctor. And he said astrology was so amazing, medical astrology, that he wanted to spend his later years traveling around lecturing doctors to try to get this into his clinics, into their clinics. Well, fat chance of that. But he left us with this wonderful, real medical encyclopedia. I use it all the time. And we also have William Davidson. So we have, they're very important, Davidson and Cornell. But then we have many others. We have probably some of you, being Theosophists, may know Max Heindel.
Oh,
Max Heindel and his wife, Augusta Frost Heindel, they ran a Rosicrucian healing clinic where they always looked at the horoscopes. And he writes about that in his book on stellar healing. He writes how it always corresponds. And I think he said they looked at over 1,000 or was it 10,000 cases. This was going on in the 1920s.
So S.P. Parchment took Handel's stuff, started in California.
Wow.
I just got done reading that. I realized it would be.
Oh, amazing. So we have Heindel. We have many, many others that are joining in. And we have Dr. Millard, who's a female doctor. Dr. Millard, was it Ruth Millard? She wrote case studies in medical astrology. We have wonderful books by Eileen Nauman on Jane Ritter Patrick. Some female writers start to finally emerge. Myself, I've written several titles of medical astrology, including one for health practitioners. I've got them all. I brought all my medical things. I didn't bring my non-medical things. But I then founded the Academy for Astrological Medicine 4 years ago, though I've had a medical astrology course for about 50 years. We teach all 6 genres. And so we're bringing it back. But what's interesting, I put on here in Portland 4 conferences, all called the Renaissance Medicine conferences in the 2013, 14, 15, 16. And medical astrology at the Friends Center. And there was always only 100 seats. They were all, I would cold call. I wasn't on computers. I'd cold call. I'd get some kid to help with, putting out something on the E stuff. And it would always fill. And people would show up from some other countries to come. We would get some people flying in, just a few. We got one guy flying up from the south. And, it would always come. And after the 4th one, everybody goes home, spreads out. And medical astrology became a huge fad. And I don't know if it had anything to do with what happened here in Portland or not, but I think it did. I think I had a big hand in this. But there's a few other people who've been running around giving lectures, lectures on the subject. And but now we have doctors practicing clinics all around the world. We just got contacted by one of our students, our graduates, in Israel. And he said at his clinic, he's begun to use it, and he cannot believe how many cases he is now solving that he could not solve. So this is absolutely amazing. And that is why it's important to disinter it. I wish it was called something else, because every time we use the word astrology, people think magic, pointed hats, and all of this. And they cannot get this out of their mind, and then the prejudice begins. There was one author, I think it was Reinhold Eppertine, who called it cosmobiology. And I think that's a wonderful term, but I don't use it because it's his, and I don't know if it's under copyright. I think he worked out a system for cosmobiology. And we know Steiner had invented a type of astrology, which he gave a special name to. But I sometimes call it cosmos biology. But it's astrological medicine, and it's too bad that we have this remarkable prejudice. Behind me.
It's great.
No, I'll put it right here, Ron.
I didn't play it. Okay.
I have, you're gonna love this. This is my gaucho straw. Ladies, this
Cool.
keeps you from smearing your lipstick. That way you can get a drink of water and not worry. Worry-free water. So I learned that on Zoom. I'm always spilling, always spill water, so I'll drink it. Whoops, you don't have to worry about spilling your water, nothing. In the straw, you can put it in hot water too. So let's see. So where we are today. So postmodern. So now we're in the modern period. We've had the most wonderful, wonderful proof that planets have temperature factors, because planetary temperature is a big part of medical astrology. But Rudolf Steiner got an idea, and he felt that if you put that the metals were traditionally split. We don't know how they did this, but it's turned out to be very accurate. And each planet has its own. This was pretty much shaped up by the 1st century. And I have a statement about it. It might have even gone back. But every time something's put in writing, it could actually be 200-year-old or 1,000-year-old tradition. We don't know. But he had an idea that if you put metal cell salts in water in solution, that somehow this would be able to show astrological effects. And he tells the chemist Frau Lily Kalisko this. And I don't know, it might have been the 20s, it might have been the 1950s, I'm not sure. But so she gets filter paper, she gets an idea how to do it, and she dissolves metals in solution. And she waits till the moon is conjoined planet, because that's your strongest aspect. When she sees the moon, say, coming up to Mars, she would dip the filter paper into a iron solution. And she found always within 10 minutes following, as soon as about 10 minutes hit, it would go crazy, the solution would go crazy all over the table. And it wouldn't do this, for other planets or other times. And every single planet matched its metal. And this can be photographed. She photographed. So
Did the solution change color? How did it go crazy?
I don't know. I've only seen photographs. Okay. And so Nicholas Kollerstrom decides to replicate it. I had the pleasure of long talking with him on the phone. He's an extremely critical examiner, critically examining. He's not just a believe everything type of guy. And he replicates it, completely replicates it. The BBC filmed it, but then they wouldn't show it. Mm-hmm. Yep. And there are other studies of this. One just really blew up. I've seen many other things. This isn't the only study that shows an immediate physical response to metals with their assigned planet. And our bodies have these metals all through. That's just one of many studies that have been done. So, oh, yes, Earl Payne, you're going to love this one. So I knew the physicist Earl Payne, who's a good friend, and he died recently. He's quite an amazing guy. He used to go swimming down it. I used to watch him swim. And he'd be swimming, there'd be a walrus swimming along with him down near Santa Cruz. Anyway, he was a big investigator into astrology and into electromagnetics. So he decided to build what he called his moon gun. And he wanted to put one on my roof, but I didn't have a flat space. His moon gun was a telescope where he could aim it, train it on a planet, and then bring its essence into water. So he did these experiments with his moon gun, and he made all this water for Venus and Jupiter and Mars, and made eclipse water. And then he would give it to people. I have an article by him, and he would give it to people, and then record. He wouldn't tell them what they were getting. Record what their experiences were. Well, apparently, when they took the Venus water, they would have sexy dreams. When they take the Mars water, they would have insomnia, be hyper. When eclipse water made them nauseous, Jupiter water tasted like sulfur. I mean, there was a real effect. So although we don't know how these things happen, we know they do. And I actually, in this book, there's only one left, but I actually I was washing the dishes. This is really funny. I've always wanted to know how astrology affected the body. And I'm washing the dishes, la-dee-dee, la-dee-da. And all of a sudden, always when I'm around water, this happens. All of a sudden, how astrology works flies into me. And this book has I drew all these little drawings and I show how it works. See, you'll have to anyway, but it's in there, and it's a little, since we're running out of time, it's a little hard to explain to you. To take me out. But it's very simple actually, how we are affected. I could probably try. I don't know what time it is. It's
Good.
Time's right.
Oh, I didn't see that. 3:19. Yeah. Oh, we're fine.
Blue.
Well, good question. Are you more interested in? Should I wrap this up?
You have a question?
Oh, because we're gonna have questions too. Is there a question? Yes. But I should wrap up the main talk though by saying that just to summarize, astrologophysic is astrological medicine. It is different from just regular medical astrology, which is any use of the cosmos. It's a system of medicine. It's what it was called, similar to Ayurvedic, similar to TCM, astrological medicine. It can be used for every single part of medicine. It offers you a microscope into the human body that nothing we know in medicine today can do. It looks at the fine template and the timing, both things modern medicine cannot do. And it can look at individual everything which we've talked about. So it's an amazing science, and I've been very happy and delighted to be able to preach to the saved and to enjoy this. I really enjoy teaching. It's my first time out of that house. 4 years. 4 years. Why I stay preserved.
It's time.
Yeah, just pickle in the house.
It's time. Yeah.
So should we have some questions?
Now let's go ahead and run the gambit here and see what we can
Yeah.
track for you.
There's somebody up there who wanted to.
I don't know. Somebody else say
Go
first.
on.
Yeah, it looks like he's somebody said somebody has a question up there.
Yeah.
He's gone.
Oh, he's gone.
I would like to ask a question. This is kind of a long one. What I was really hoping for is a little bit of an insight into how medical astrology actually works. So I was wondering if you could take a case that you've diagnosed and relate it and tell us how you figured it out on the chart, from the chart.
It's like teaching astrology.
Well, just assume that we know quite a bit.
Okay. Well, there's actually a perfect book for you, Medical Astrology for Health Practitioners. It goes into the very basics. I'll do a little quick one. This wasn't going to be a talk on how it worked, but history now. Okay.
Yeah, it's good.
I've got gazillion questions on it, but I'll just teach 1 minute
Okay,
because there's so many parts to it. It's a
that's what I want to hear.
well, we don't have time for that.
What, next week?
Yes. So you have your chart. That's round. And so, you don't actually need to know your birth time for this one. It's just pretend the ascendant is Scorpio. So Saturn could be anywhere. So just let's say a person's born with Saturn right there. But wherever Saturn is cold, and Saturn is dry. But by dry, it means astringent. It means it's pulling energy together. It's tightening. Whereas Mars is dry because it boils off water. Very different. This is astringent. And so Saturn is also slow, hypo. So wherever Saturn is in the chart, the sign rules a specific body zone. So Scorpio rules your colon and your excretory system, your genitals, your nose, your sweat glands. It rules all the excretory system. So, but say this is a natal chart. Okay, so say the person's suffering from rheumatism, or they're suffering from chronic constipation, or they're suffering from some other issue in their intestines. You don't know what it is, and oh, this is it. Saturn you got something cold and slow. It could work out, and then there's 3 parts to the sign. There's 30 degrees to the sun, each little different part. So you have cold and slow here. And then you might have, each planet has a different temperature. And so Mars is hot. Where inflammation is, Mars is hot. And then you have something called the South Node, where there's often something that's weak, a weakness. And so you combine this with what you know of the symptoms of a person. Symptoms, and you're looking for something, but also you can see it without knowing symptoms. Your psychic eye is partly involved. But sometimes I will look and I'll just sort of know what of the many possibilities this would be. And say it was Saturn in Libra. Then you're more, Libra rules the kidneys. Kidneys and many of the body's fluid imbalances, salt, potassium, influences blood pressure. The person's getting violent headaches. And Aries, this is a Dr. Davidson example, but I've seen it work. So Aries rules the head. Here. But the charts look, there's nothing in Aries, but the person's born with that. Well, then you know it's gravel in the kidneys is very likely if the headaches are chronic. Now, if you have sharp butt pain, that's Mars. Now, you can also use it in timing. So you got a chart, and say Saturn right now is in Pisces. So Saturn is going, we always put the current on the outside. This is your current Saturn. So Saturn's in Pisces, right? And so it has a collective influence on everybody. And it may or may not influence you, but it will if it's showing symptoms. And the Pisces rules the feet. A lot of people have been having weird foot things, but it rules the ECM, extracellular matrix, the giant ocean within. So it's causing stagnating waters. And we have also the lymphatic system, very Piscean. So, for almost everybody who's getting toxic right now, ill or stiff, I'm expecting there's a current influence of a slight slowing down of the lymphatic process. There's many. You have to study medicine. So, is it the cells, the internal waters are getting too much toxins in them, not being sucked up by the lymphatics? Are the lymphatics just slowing down? What's going on here? There's different parts of the lymphatic system. It's just as detailed as medicine. But honestly, you can do the most terrific cures knowing not that much about medicine with a Merck manual and a horoscope. I would say with a Merck manual and an expert knowledge of medical astrology, you are already ahead of your Renaissance physicians, except you may not know your remedials. They also had wonderful uses of stones. Now, I will touch on this because you're theosophists, but they have a wonderful method, and especially in India, called upaye, which literally means planetary antidotes, for wearing a stone that will antidote a problem, excess or deficiency of that planet's energy. Say if you have an excessive Mars and you're always boiling and angry and hot, and you aren't getting enough exercise, and your chart shows that you're lacking all water and your moon is in trouble. Well, you might, if your chart permits it, because you have to know what to do, you might wear a pearl. Pearl. Why? Because the stones are refracting cosmic color rays. That's how cosmic color rays, remember, Jyotish, the word for astrology in India, means the science of light. And so they have a stone for each planet. We teach this at the Academy. I wasn't the first to write about it, but I was probably the first to teach it in the US. And we have a wonderful course on it. And of using the horoscope on how to select specific gems for yourself and how to wear them. It's very structured science. They did not have this in Europe. In Europe, they did have stones, but used very differently. And they did not have the concept of using stones to bring that cosmic color ray into your body, into your field. And they're doing wonderful cures in India. Modern modern medical astrologers in India have devised Ramchandran and Benoitish and Bhattacharya and Bhattacharya are the four that I can remember. And there's a American Hindu, Brown, did wonderful where they have found different methods to get these cosmic color rays through gems into you, spinning a fan with the gems embedded over your photograph, having amazing cures, especially with sapphires and things. So, you know, there's all kinds of things you can do. But so basically, it works. If I was to simplify the system, this is way too simple because the system has 6 genres and every one has different things. That's why it's a little. But you know, just you know, what you can do right off. I mean, if you knew nothing at all, you could learn. You could learn to use a lot of this system. So I wrote a little book for practitioners by just looking at Saturn, Mars, where you're going to be hot, where you're going to be cold, hypo, hyper, chronic, acute. So, and then you look at the south node where you're weak. But every planet has a temperature. And then you have, I didn't talk about Melothesia, that's zodiacal man. You all know those pictures, don't you? The zodiacal man that's hanging out, you know. Anyway, so we have 12 body zones. So some genius discovered way back, it looks like it's Egypt, the earliest connection between the ecliptic plane and the body appears to come from the tomb of Ramses V, where they have, I have it in the timeline for you, a giant, it's the very first thing they found a giant wheel with parts of the zodiac assigned to bodies. But so we have 12 body zones assigned to the different, but they also have functions. And your modern medical astrology is a great deal more developed and sophisticated than it was in medieval. It's really very good. And we're still working on it. We're discovering new rulerships, but so you have I always have to have hair on. Anyway, so you have the 12 body zones. So if a planet is in a body zone, it brings its influence to that body zone. So like Uranus rules spasm. So spasm can be anywhere. So, you know, Uranus is in Capricorn, the area of the knees, but Capricorn has a lot to do with the gallbladder. And even Dr. Davidson said that Uranus in Capricorn can cause spasm in the gallbladder. So you always look where there might be spasm. And Uranus works real strong by transit. Boy, if it crosses your Mercury, you will feel it. It's very electrical, so is Mercury. Usually there's, you know, you get real nervous or jittery or insomnia or anxious or something. You have spasms or tremors. I've seen it all the time. I've seen the most amazing things in medical astrology. And I'll tell one more story. It's a sad one, but she was very courageous. I had a very dear friend, and she was in England. I hadn't seen her in 20 years. And one morning, I woke up upright, and her chart is right in my head, because I have a photographic memory for charts I work with. And it was, I can actually show the chart. So she was an Aries rising, that's the head. Right? And then she was born in what we call the 8th house in the sign of Scorpio. And right then, I see the chart, and I saw Uranus was coming right to her, which happens to a lot of people. But it was happening when Mars, Saturn, both Olympics, and an eclipse. I believe it was an eclipse. It's been a while now. This was like 10 years ago. It was happening over her sun, which is the center of life. And this is the house of death. And I knew she was going to die in 1 week. I was given the information. So I called her up. She was a very serious mystic. And she was a very serious mystic. And I called her up and I said, you know, the chart looks really very, very dangerous. I didn't say that. I said, can you just stay home? You know, you really care. She says, oh no, I'm getting married next week. Everything's
Yeah.
That's what this is. Well, in 1 week, she woke up having terrible, her tongue was going crazy. And so she went to the hospital. Luckily, she was in England. She didn't have to wait for 6 weeks. And they discovered she had a glioblastoma. And
She had a what?
A brain tumor, the worst kind. And she probably would have been dead if they immediately operated. And then she did eventually. She was very courageous, and she looked at the whole thing like it was very interesting to her. She was like, you know, she was a mystic, and she wasn't. I would be all upset. She said, "Oh, but Judith, we all must die." And she was enjoying watching the whole process, and she got up. It was an interesting thing. She went to a coma. Fine. She was in hospice, and they called me. They said she'll never come out. She can't speak. She can hear, but she can't speak. She's never going to be able to talk to you again. And she's going to go into the way out. Somehow she got up from the computer and wrote me a last thing about actually about the boards and saying things from the other side and everything. So, you know, that's an 8, born in the house of death and the sign of death. This was actually of interest to her, see? And I've noticed Scorpio people will be like that. I've known 2 Scorpios that both had root canals without Novocaine.
Oh.
One because he found it pain interesting. That was my dad. The other was a dear friend who was an ex-wrestler, and she did it because she didn't have enough money, so why not? That was what she said to me. That's Scorpio for you. They're at home with pain, death. They find this stuff curious, you know. So, but anyway,
So what's the line to Mars? Can you?
it's an opposition. It's an opposition.
Oh, to the sun.
Mars is afflicting the center of life. Yeah, this is the center of life. Mars, the sun is always the center of life in a chart. The moon, ascendant degree, ascendant ruler can also be. But I found one thing I found wrong. The ancients were just as obsessed with gender as we are now, and they would even more. They'd always say, well, the center of life for man is the sun, and the center of life for man is a woman. This isn't true. Yeah, I studied hundreds of deaths. About 7 out of every 10 deaths, maybe 8, the sun is bad for both genders. Sometimes it's the moon that kills them. Sometimes it's the ascendant. They're right that these 3 are important, but it doesn't change. Women are also, their center of life is also the sun. The sun gives everybody. So that's been my findings. So sometimes I'm very skeptical. I challenge tradition if it seems like they're just being symmetrical, or they're always having to reverse everything for women, which, you know, out of a feeling like this has to be done, and that the left side is always for women, the right side is always for men. But, you know, is that true? Let's take a look at what actually happens. I haven't studied that, but I will tell you the sun is the center of life for everyone. And it's usually afflicted at death in very specific ways. And every now and then you'll find an exceptional person. Sometimes it's Jupiter that's there. They had all these remarkable methods for determining the highway or the center of life in the old times. All these different methods, must be 6 of them. They also call it the outer method. So I studied them all. And then I just look at deaths. Every time anybody dies, I go look up their chart, study it. And, you know, I can just take all those roles and put them over here, and the sun. The moon, ascendant ruler, also important. And usually an eclipse has preceded, in the past year to year and a half, within 3 degrees of a hard aspect of the comes to the sun. But yeah, you will find sometimes some people are moon ruled, it's true. But it won't follow what sometimes they say, well, you'll be moon ruled if you're born at night. Well, not always true. Not always true. You'll be sun ruled if you're born in the day. That's the center of life. Not always true when you look at the day. So anyway, I wasn't planning to teach astrology today, but that fills your stomachs a little bit. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.